I'm Chris Thompson, founder of Sidekick, but I'm here today because I believe vulnerability, the ability to be vulnerable, is the difference between living and dying. Now, there's a quote by Paulo Coelho: "We live as if we were never going to die, and we die as if we had never lived." Now, Thanksgiving Day 2018, I woke up on the sidewalk for about the fourth day in a row. It was raining, and the hospital pants and the sweater I was wearing were all I had left in life. And I asked myself, how did I get to this point? And the reason I got to this point is because years before, I began to believe that the thoughts in my head were too dark and too scary to share with another human being. The fact is, when we can't be vulnerable, we become isolated. And isolation leads to depression, anxiety, addiction, suicide, and as Paulo Coelho mentioned, countless lives that were never lived. And when you acknowledge things like teen suicide rate or the 22 million Americans who chronically battle addiction, we have to acknowledge that this is a societal problem. And we have to acknowledge that most of technology and social media today only amplifies this isolation. It's my projection of me speaking with your projection of you, leaving very little room for vulnerability and very little room for empathy. Now, we've created some spaces for vulnerability in the form of therapy or support groups, or even, if necessary, rehab. Though all these things are good, unfortunately, they aren't available at the moment when we're most vulnerable. This is why people who go to rehab are subject to a 5 to 10% success rate. They go to a treatment center for 30 days, and then they return back to the same world of which they are isolated, the same world of social stigma, the same world that discourages vulnerability. Now, I am very lucky in that Thanksgiving 2018 was the start of my own personal comeback story. But the fact is, I was lucky enough to meet the right people at the right time. And shortly along my own comeback story, I asked myself, what if we could build technology intentionally around empathy and vulnerability in order to fuel the most epic wave of real-life comeback stories the world has ever seen? So in January of 2019, we launched the Sidekick app. And it was built on what we call our empathy algorithm. It's an algorithm that motivates people to help people. And what we found shortly after we launched is it doesn't work sometimes, it works every time. Since we launched, not a single member has written a post on our platform, and we're not given support, motivation, advice from at least one other member. In fact, we've optimized this empathy algorithm to the point where every member who posts, an average of 6.8 members will respond and tell the person exactly what they need to hear. And this has led to countless members claiming that Sidekick saved their life. And by helping people help people, we were able to grow this platform from 10,000 members to over 100,000 members in the last 12 months alone. By meeting people where they're at, empowering their vulnerability, and rewarding empathy, we have created behavioral changes at a massive scale. And today I want to invite you to join us in building not social media platforms, but social meaningful platforms. Building technology intentionally around vulnerability, scaling empathy, and building community around what makes us human. And even if it's not building technology, just conversations push the needle forward. Giving space for those in your life to be vulnerable, meeting them with empathy. And for companies, making vulnerability and empathy a part of your value proposition. Now, because of how deep and personal this mission is to myself and our team here, we were able to build Sober Sidekick from the ground up, 0 to 100,000 members, with not $1 in funding. We had no cash of our own to put into it, just our time, just our commitment to the mission, just our willingness to listen, meet people where they're at. And the reason why is because we're all people who would have died if we didn't find space to be vulnerable in our own personal life, which is why we won't stop until we've created the most epic wave of real-life comeback stories the world has ever seen. And at Sober Sidekick, we recognize that addiction just happens to be the most urgent and impactful way for us to start. But we intend to create a world of which there's no issue that you can't receive immediate and empathetic human connection on the things that make us feel most vulnerable.